Hi everyone and welcome back to Buenos Pages to another Hamlet video. Today we're talking about Act 3 of Hamlet. If you haven't checked out Act 1 and Act 2, please do. I have linked the videos up in the cards and also down below. It's part of my playlist preparing for the Edexcel A-level English literature curriculum. Let's get started. Enter Claudius, Gertrude, Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern. Claudius asks why Hamlet is acting this way and whether he has told Rosencrantz and Guildenstern why he is acting this way. They respond that he confesses that he feels distracted but won't explain the cause. Guildenstern adds that with a crafty madness keeps aloof, that Hamlet doesn't seem to be acting too crazy. It seems very sound, very put on, and of course we remember that Hamlet has actually directly told Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that he's putting on a show, but I think the assumption was that they were too dense to understand the reference. So we see here that actually no, they do have their own suspicions that this is fake. Hamlet has received them like a gentleman, but with much forcing of his disposition. So in other words, they recognize that it all rang a bit superficial. They tell Claudius and Gertrude that they told Hamlet of the actors, because this is where we last left off. This is a direct continuation of the scene. There were actors coming in, and there did seem in him a kind of joy to hear of it. So a joy in getting revenge? Because we as the audience have obviously witnessed that Hamlet has his own plan. He plans to catch the king out, to see if he starts guiltily when he hears the story that so closely mirrors his own story, but we haven't got to see yet what kind of speech he plans to put in. At this point, we know far more than Claudius and Gertrude do, so for them this merely seems like happy news. Oh, Hamlet's excited to see a play, how nice, maybe he'll finally be distracted from our hasty marriage and the fact that his father has died not so long ago. So Claudius entreats them. Good gentlemen, give him a further edge and drive his purpose on these delights. Because of course, for them, this is a sign of recovery. To be gloomy, to be despondent, to scorn these social conventions, this is a sign of madness, and Hamlet's disposition is exactly that. So they hope that by distracting him, by placing his mind on affairs far distant from the ones going on at court, that he can get back to his former self. Although it is up to us to decide how much Claudius actually wants him to get back on track, because it would be far more convenient to just say the man's crazy and get rid of him, ship him off to England, as is the plan that we'll find out a bit later. So Rosencrantz and Guildenstern leave, and Claudius tells Gertrude that they will send Ophelia to Hamlet, and her father and myself, lawful espios, will so bestow ourselves that seeing unseen we may of their encounter frankly judge. So essentially we're going to do more spying, and we're going to keep on using Ophelia. So we're going to send her off to Hamlet, and we'll observe his reaction, the way that he speaks to her, and so we can frankly judge if Hamlet does truly love Ophelia. This is something that Polonius has told us in the previous act. So Gertrude is happy to obey, and she wishes that it is Ophelia as the cause and not her. What we discussed before, she has immense feelings of guilt, and she's very, very eager to say, oh, well, maybe my son's acting this way not because of my marriage and because of his father's death, but rather because he's in love with a girl and the girl's not answering his love back. She leaves, and Polonius remarks to Ophelia, who goes through this entire scene without saying anything. We don't get to hear any of her thoughts, any of her feelings on the matter. No, she's being used. She's getting instructions from the royals to go and talk to Hamlet and see what emotion you get out of him, and it's up to her to obey. She doesn't really have much choice beyond that. So Polonius tells her to read on this book, that show of such an exercise may color your loneliness. We are oft to blame in this. It is too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious actions we do sugar over the devil himself. In other words, by reading this book, you're covering any potential suspicion, because why else would a woman be wandering out alone without a man to accompany her? Are you looking for trouble? Do you want to ruin your reputation? No. So take this book and pretend you're reading it. And otherwise, because she's just a woman wandering around, this way even the devil would not guess, since you're doing something useful and you're reading. And of course, it would have also been a little bit shocking to have a woman go around just reading, but he's hoping that this is far less suspicious than just a woman on her own, and that Hamlet will mark her. Although for a woman of Ophelia's standing, for a woman in court, I suppose that it would have been fine for them to read, but certainly not for the common woman. Certainly not for many of the women who were watching the play not a lot of them were probably literate. So it is interesting the way that this is staged, and to think about how Shakespeare's contemporary audience would have received this. Because I think in analyzing Hamlet now as a modern audience, because we are reading it and analyzing it, there's quite a bit lost in what we think about when we think about how audiences would view it. Because it is a play, it's meant to be performed, it's meant to be spoken with emotion and feeling. And so some lines I think are aimed at the audience, and it's just interesting to see what is aimed at being comedy and what's aimed at being a social remark and what's of course tragic. But to continue, Claudius aside remarks in a first admission of guilt, "Oh, 'tis true, how smart a lash that speech does give my conscience. The harlot's cheek, beautied with plastering art, is not more ugly to the thing that helps it than is my deed to my most painted word. Oh, heavy burden." Then there's a sudden shift. So the topic doesn't even get to be like thought and considered by the audience to think about, is he then actually guilty? Has the ghost spoken the truth? Is it then up to Hamlet to get the world rid of this maniac, this horrible sinner and murderer? And Polonius remarks that he hears Hamlet coming, and so they withdraw and they hide behind the arras, and Hamlet launches into his most famous soliloquy. We forget that this soliloquy is actually not as private as we may imagine. It's quite a public soliloquy. There are people watching, although poor Hamlet is unaware, so he's airing out his most innermost thoughts, his most dirty laundry to the public. And Polonius and Claudius are hiding, whereas Ophelia at this point seems to be on the other side of the room. So while Hamlet may not perhaps be 100% certain that Polonius and Claudius are watching, he may potentially guess, and he also sees Ophelia, so he isn't quite as alone as we think. And to be fair, we say that he's airing out his dirty laundry, but it's not only his innermost thoughts, it's quite philosophical musings on the nature of things, for example, a philosophical discussion on death. Hamlet speaks in general terms. He says we, he says us, he doesn't at any point say I, although we can gather what his inner state is from this monologue, if this is what he's considering and spending so much time thinking about death. It links back to his gloomy disposition, to his despondent mood. I mean, he doesn't want to live on this earth anymore, and he's mentioned this quite a few times throughout the play. To be or not to be, that is the question, the most famous line of all time. Essentially, he is asking if it's worth it to live or not to live, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer, so to live and suffer the experience of life, all the troubles and fortune's fickle nature, or is it better by opposing end them? In other words, is it better to simply die rather than live and continue facing all these life problems and difficulties and issues? Why am I continuing on living when my life is so terrible? My mother married my uncle, my father is dead, nobody understands me in this court. Is it better for me to just die? But then he doesn't ever say me, so it's applicable to all of us. He's asking all of us whether our worldly issues are worth the hassle to continue living. Is it better simply to die, to buy a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to end all the suffering of life? So this would have been a blasphemous speech. It's talking about suicide. It's talking about committing it, and even to think about it and commit it is, or like to think about it and voice it is already blasphemy. To commit it is sacrilege. It was believed that you were sculpted in God's image, so by killing yourself, you're killing God in a way, so you are doomed for eternity. No priest wanted to bury people who committed suicide in the churches. It was a taboo topic, and it was much forbidden to even think about it, let alone publicly voice it here in this play. This would have been a very scandalous speech, and perhaps if Hamlet is aware of just how scandalous this would have been, perhaps this is another reason why he's voicing this publicly, to be considered mad, to be considered on the threshold, this idea of liminality, that he's somewhere between the sane and the insane, that he's somewhere between what society deems acceptable and completely unacceptable. He talks about it in metaphors. He says to shuffle off this mortal coil, a euphemism for death, to shrug off this mortal body. And this also has its problem, because what dreams may come must give us pause. In other words, it might not be worth it to continue living, but we're just scared because we don't know what comes next. Who would bear all of the whips and scorns of time, he asks? Who would put up with being oppressed and unrequited love, and the law being unjust, the rudeness of officials' dislikes? These are all the things he lists as the terrible the terrible characteristics of life that we must bear, when he himself might his quietus make. So when you could find peace, when you could secure your relief from life. And quietus est can also mean to be paid. So the debt is actually man's debt to God for creating us, for allowing us to live. And you can pay it by dying. So who would bear this? No one. But the reason we do, he says, is but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. He's saying that we are still living and suffering life because we are too scared of what comes after. There's no winning life because even when you think you've won and you've died and you haven't committed a sin, you've died of natural causes, you don't know what comes next. What comes next might be far worse than what is here right now. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought. We're all cowards because we do not escape life. Just because we're scared of the escape, we don't even attempt to seek a better life. The country from which no one returns, because it's not a decision that you can change. We're so fearful to go and try death because we know that there's no coming back. And if we don't like death, even less than we like life, then tough. We have to bear it. And for that reason, nobody does anything. And this, of course, is also prompted by him speaking to the ghost of his father, who did make the return journey. And we've seen how his father's ghost suffers because he didn't really have time to make any amends, to pray, to prepare for his journey, because of course he was murdered and his soul is suffering. He has to be purged. He has to spend a certain amount of time on planet Earth and burning for his sins. And so Hamlet is very aware of the suffering, and he doesn't want to be reduced to the same thing as his father, this idea of dying as well without making things right. Now he knows that he's been chosen. He has to enact this revenge. Otherwise, what's the point? He could just go ahead and die. It's the same thing. Hamlet in particular is in a futile situation because if he kills his uncle, he's a murderer and a sinner, but if he doesn't kill him, then he doesn't enact his promise, and so he would also be a sinner because he has promised, he has given his word, and he should be avenging his father's death, this idea of filial piety and loyalty, and he would kill himself too. And then he turns to Ophelia. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered. So possibly at this point, yeah, when he notices Ophelia, that's it. He realizes if Ophelia is here, her father is probably here too. Because again, a girl wandering out alone, especially a girl who's the daughter of Polonius, who is pimping out his daughter, and as he has said to Polonius several times before, it's all terribly suspicious, of course. Ophelia has been avoiding him for weeks, not replying to his letters, and suddenly, conveniently, she's here. I mean, it's all too convenient, and Hamlet recognizes this. And she tells him to take back his letters. Take these again, for to the novel mind, rich gifts wax poor when givers prove unkind. There, my lord. And he responds with, are you honest? And again, I think he very much suspects her, so this is a double-edged question. Are you honest? Like, oh, are you serious about me taking them back? But it's also, are you honest, as in, are you being truthful with me, or is your dad over there behind the curtain spying on us? The dialogue goes into prose at this point, potentially because of their proximity, or potentially because of a lack of respect on Hamlet's part. He lashes out at her. He's hurt. He's betrayed. He tells her outright that he doesn't love her anymore. You should not have believed me, for virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish of it. I loved you not. And he then tells her to get thee to a nunnery. Only by entering a nunnery can Ophelia avoid sin. She won't breed sinners. So nunnery, as in not like a brothel, as in like a slang term for a brothel, but as in an actual nunnery. He tells her that if she really wants to be all this innocent and chaste and naive woman that she's trying to be, go to a nunnery. That's the only place where you truly accomplish that. And while he tells her this, and it sounds like he's telling her that she's not chaste enough, I feel like there's also a sense of protection here on his part, because of course there she would be safe. And he tells her that there she will not be made a pawn used by her father, or to have men chasing her, men like him. We are errant knaves all, believe none of us. Go thy ways to a nunnery. Where's your father? I mean, essentially he's saying, yeah, all men are terrible, myself included. Go to a nunnery and then you won't have to deal with this anymore. And I think he's feeling regretful that he's using her, but at the same time, of course, he's very hurt by her actions, and this is kind of his attempt to be a better person and just tell her, go to a nunnery and get out of this entire situation while it's not too late. And asking about her father here is, I think, more proof that he's aware that he's being watched, and he's testing out her reaction. And when she lies to him and tells him that there's no Polonius, he tells her one more time, farewell. And Ophelia, poor Ophelia, at this point is very emotional. She makes a few remarks like, oh, help him, you sweet heavens. She thinks he's gone utterly mad, because here is Hamlet, who she hasn't talked to for weeks, who she thinks is obsessed with her, who's mad because she doesn't love him, now telling her that, oh, I never loved you anyway, go to a nunnery. He ignores this. He ignores all her remarks, and he tells her one more time, if thou wilt needs marry, marry a fool, for wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. To a nunnery go, and quickly too, farewell. Yes, he has been hurt by Ophelia and her behavior too. And now he's saying, well, not only all men are terrible, but all women are terrible too. Because wise men will know, the few wise men that there are will know that you women are horrible, that you make us behave horribly too. And at this point, Ophelia's hands are very much tied because she's so dependent on her father and, well, Hamlet essentially, and Hamlet's good graces, and just all the men in the court to do with her as they please. And I don't think Hamlet really realizes this. He's just hurt by her betrayal. So he tells her one more time to go to a nunnery. I mean, how many times has he told her to go to a nunnery already? He's repeating himself over and over. And poor Ophelia is a nervous wreck and an emotional wreck trying to deal with the impact of his hurtful words. And he says, I say we will have no more marriages. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. It's a reference to Claudius and his intention to kill. Poor Ophelia seems utterly broken at this point. She remarks at how such a noble mind is here overthrown, and she's completely emotionally devastated. Oh, woe is me! Have seen what I have seen, see what I see. Claudius and Polonius enter as Hamlet leaves Ophelia crying, emotional, saying, woe is me, like in complete disarray, and Claudius has caught on. Love. His affections do not that way tend. He realizes that Hamlet is not mad, rather there's something in his should over which his melancholy sits on brood. He decides that there's something dangerous, and he should think about removing Hamlet. He decides to send him to England, or at least to consider it. Happily the seas and countries different with variable objects shall expel this something settled matter in his heart. And while Claudius is considering this, Polonius merely tells Ophelia, you need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said. We heard it all. And he then reverts back to Claudius and the said topic. There's no attempt to comfort Ophelia, no attempt to say, oh, my poor daughter, don't worry about it. Or, oh, like, I'm sure it'll be all right. You don't need to go to a nunnery. Oh, he just tells Claudius to have his queen mother all alone and treat him to show his griefs. I mean, he's already planning their next step. His daughter is just left. The audience is left to follow Claudius and Polonius' speech, and Ophelia is still lying on the ground upset. He tells Claudius that he'll hide and listen to this conversation between Hamlet and his mother, and if she finds him not well, then you can send him to England, or to confine him where your wisdom best shall think. Claudius agrees, remarking that madness in great ones must not unwatched go. And they exit. And that's the end of Act 3, Scene 1. We then move on to Act 3, Scene 2. This is a very long act. So enter Hamlet and 2 or 3 of the players. Hamlet launches into a monologue about what he thinks actors should play like. He voices his disapproval of excess and overacting. The instruction is given in prose. He says to speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounce it to you, trippingly on the tongue. So in other words, speak normally, as I did, with careful pronunciation of all the words. Be careful with the way that your tongue moves to say these very words. And don't gesture too excessively. Do not saw the air too much with your hand thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent tempest, and as I may say, the whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. I think there's quite a bit here directed at the actors and in joke for the audience. Hamlet says that it offends him to hear an actor overact, to split the ears of the groundlings with bad and loud acting. So the groundlings would be the people who bought really cheap tickets who would stand for the entirety of Shakespeare's show. So in other words, Shakespeare saying that a bad actor hurts the ears of his poor groundlings. So like, I'm taking care of my audience, make sure your actors are taking care too. He instructs them to suit the action to the word to the action, interaction with the special observance that you overstep not the modesty of nature. He's saying that acting should be there to hold up the mirror up to nature, to show virtue her own features, scorn her own image, and if it's overdone, it's ruining the performance. They imitated humanity so abominably. And there's also another instruction, and let those that play your clowns speak no more than is set down for them. In other words, don't let your actors ad-lib, improvise. And I feel like this bit is coming very much from Shakespeare rather than Hamlet, and it's all about, again, appearance versus reality. It's very much a reminder that Hamlet is a play, so it could be like a reference saying, look how good Hamlet is. We don't have any of this. None of our actors are overacting. Although, of course, in Hamlet's fit and passion, I think he would be gesticulating quite a lot. So he sends the actors off. And at that point, Polonius, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern come in, and he asks Polonius if the king will hear this piece of work. Polonius adds that the queen too, and that presently. So Hamlet is clearly not even focused on the queen. He doesn't care about his mother. He's focused on the king and his thirst for revenge. Claudius is the intended audience for this one. At this point, it all becomes very meta because we're watching a performance of a performance in a performance. Hamlet sends Polonius to get them, and he asks Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to go help. His only interaction with them is to tell them, will you two help to hasten them? It's very impersonal, it's very dismissive, and it's a sharp contrast to how he greets Horatio when he next comes in. He says, thou art even as just a man as ever my conversation coped withal. Horatio replies, oh, my dear lord. Hamlet dismisses his protest when he says, oh, like, you're flattering me, my lord. And he says, nay, do not think I flatter. There's nothing for me to flatter because you are a man that fortune's buffets and rewards has taken with equal thanks. In other words, your response to life is to treat it equally, the good, the bad. You're rational, and I admire that. Give me that man that is not passion's slave, and I will wear him in my heart's core, in my heart of heart, as I do thee. There's much admiration for Horatio because he has the qualities that Hamlet lacks. Horatio is far more rational than Hamlet. He's far more considerate of everything. He doesn't let his disposition be changed by even the wildest of emotions. He then continues to talk about the circumstance, which I have told thee of my father's death. And this is important because he's confided in Horatio about what the ghost has said. He didn't tell his other friends. He didn't tell Marcellus. He didn't tell Bernardo. He certainly didn't tell Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, so we see who his true friends are. He asks him, even with the very comment of thy soul, observe my uncle. In other words, he wants more proof that it is not a damned ghost that we have seen, and my imaginations are as foul as Vulcan's stithy. So Vulcan was the god of the smith, so his smithy, Vulcan's smithy, was thought as being the blackest of them all, and then of course the affiliations with hell, the connotations of darkness. So he's saying basically that make sure that it's not my melancholy and imagination that have conjured this ghost, that I'm not actually mad and I'm just thinking that I'm sane by pretending to be mad, that I have actually seen this ghost, and that I'm not just feeling depressed and anxious and letting my imagination get the best of me. Then there's a Danish march and a flourish of trumpets. Enter Claudius, Gertrude, Polonius, Ophelia, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and other lords. So Claudius asks, how fares our cousin Hamlet? And he replies with, in face of the chameleon's dish. So chameleons lived on air, apparently. This is a cryptic saying. This was an ancient belief that they didn't eat anything, and that explains the next answer. I eat the air, promise crammed. In other words, there are a lot of empty promises in this room, and Claudius says he doesn't know what to say because these aren't his words, but Hamlet says neither are they his. He then moves on to Polonius. Again, he's just flying from topic to topic. He's not really concentrating, not having a proper conversation. He asked him if he acted, and Polonius says that he acted like Julius Caesar, and Hamlet swiftly moves on, telling him that it was a brute part of him to kill so capital a calf there. So capital a calf as in such a prize fool. He insults Claudius, he insults Polonius, and then worst of all, Ophelia gets the most of it. So initially he says he won't sit with his mother and will sit with the more attractive Ophelia, which of course Polonius notices. Here's more attractive, as in she's a magnet, but he then proceeds to just throw sexual innuendo after sexual innuendo. He asks if she can lie in her lap, and she says no, and then he pretends to be scandalized and say, no, I just meant my head in your lap. And she says, of course, and then Hamlet asks, do you think I meant country matters? Country as in political, but country as in also a play on words, as in the very bad word that you think it is, that he's throwing at poor scandalized Ophelia. And she doesn't get this because she's innocent, but Ophelia replies, I think nothing, my lord. And then this would have been also filthy, quite a recurrent theme in Shakespeare's plays. They are quite bawdy sometimes. There's quite a lot of sexual innuendos and sexual content in them. They're quite scandalous. And so nothing, of course, refers to the whole, the pun. It's a very Shakespearean matter, and Hamlet gets it, and he says, that's a fair thought, to lie between maids' legs. So what is, asks Ophelia, and he replies, no thing, nothing. So that's what's between a woman's legs, essentially, is what he's saying. And Ophelia still doesn't get it, but she probably can tell that it's not very nice, and she tells him that he's married today, and at that point he gets angry. What should a man do but be merry? For look you how cheerfully my mother looks, and my father died within 2 hours. When Ophelia tells him, like, my lord, don't exaggerate, it's been 4 months, he asks if it has been so long, and says, nay then, let the devil wear black, for I'll have a suit of sables. The fur of the sable was thought as the blackest of the black, so he's saying that it isn't obvious. It's kind of like the expression, is the Pope Catholic? So like, obviously the Pope is Catholic, so isn't it obvious that I'm grieving and I haven't forgotten? I'm more black than the devil himself. Okay, so let's talk about the play. Oboe's play. There's a king and a queen who come in very lovingly. The king goes to sleep, she leaves him. She comes in, then an anonymous person comes in and takes off his crown, kisses the crown, pours poison in the king's ear. The queen returns, finds the king dead, and is distraught. The poisoner comes in again, pretends to lament. After that, his body is carried away, the body of the king, and he woos the queen with gifts, and she's unwilling, but in the end, she accepts his love. That's like what I can say in 15 seconds about the play. So Ophelia asks what this is, and Hamlet replies, Mitching Malico, that means mischief. Mitching means lurking, waiting for the chance to steal something, and Malico is wrongdoing, so bad deeds, wicked trouble. When Ophelia asks whether the players will explain and tell her what the show means, since Hamlet is acting so petty towards her, Hamlet replies, or any show that you show him, be not you shamed to show, he will not shame to tell you what it means. And Ophelia gets this mean barb. I mean, he's telling her, like, if you take off your clothes, of course they will. So she replies, you are not, I'll mark the play. I don't want to talk to you anymore. And she tells him that the prologue was brief, because she's like, okay, I don't want to talk to this man, but maybe I should make an effort. She feels guilty, and of course she has feelings for him. And he replies, as woman's love. Poor Ophelia. So she's just trying to tell him that, oh, the prologue was short, and he's like, yeah, like your love. So she's trying to make conversation, but all his barbs are very hurtful, and she thinks that they're aimed at her. And to be honest, they could be aimed at her, but they could be in equal parts aimed at his mother. Enter player king and player queen. So the queen remarks that the king seems recently far away, that she distrusts him. Yet though I distrust, discomfort you, my lord, it nothing must, for women's fear and love holds quantity neither aught or in extremity. So in other words, a woman's fear and love is like not exactly powerful or strong. So did Hamlet insert these lines? Very possibly, as a slight at his mother. And then it gets worse. He says, a second time I kill my husband dead, when second husband kisses me in bed. So yeah, very scandalous that this queen is doing just that. I mean, I don't know what Gertrude is feeling at this moment, since the focus is very much on Claudius at the end of the scene, but likely these are feelings that she has been thinking about for a long time. So this cannot be pleasant to witness. The king replies that, most necessary 'tis that we forget to pay ourselves what to ourselves is stepped, what to ourselves in passion we propose, the passion ending, does the purpose lose. The violence of either grief or joy their own enactors with themselves destroy, where joy most revels, grief does most lament. Grief joys, joy grieves on slender accident. And he also adds, so essentially what he's saying is that, well, we must not forget, so there's grief, there's joy. It's exactly what Claudius has been saying, in equal parts mirth and equal parts dole, when he was comparing funerals and wedding in Act 1. He also adds that our thoughts are ours, their ends none of our own. So think thou wilt no second husband wed, but die thy thoughts when thy first lord is dead. So stop thinking about your first husband and think about me. And the queen gives in. Both here and hence pursue me lasting strife, if once a widow ever I be wife. At that point, Hamlet's like, she better be getting this. He turns to his mother, he asks her if she's liking it, and she says, the lady protests too much, methinks. So she's thinking, actually, the lady should have just gone and married the guy. He has a point. And Claudius asks what the play is called, And Hamlet says, "It is the mousetrap, your majesty, and we that have free souls, it touches us not. Let the gallant jade wince, our withers are unwrung." So yeah, it's called the mousetrap. Hey, but why are you feeling guilty? I mean, we're not guilty, right? So you shouldn't be feeling guilty at all. Our conscience is free. Of course, sarcasm and irony. So player Lucianus comes in. He's the nephew of the king who, thoughts black, hands apt, drugs fit, and time agreement, pours the poison in the king's ear. So it's a nephew, not the uncle, to make it less obvious, but it's also Hamlet being like, I'm coming for you. His name's Gonzago, and Hamlet remarks that you shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. The nephew, not the uncle, a warning, and he at this point continues to be inappropriate towards Ophelia. It would cost you a groaning to take off my edge when she asks him what she can do to help him. So he's saying like, oh, if I hear your groans when we're in bed, then I'll be fine. And he is then most nervous when Luciano comes in, and Ophelia remarks that you are keen, my lord, you are keen. Because of course for Hamlet, he's witnessing the climax of the play. He's excited to see how Claudius will react. And at the point of the murder, the king rises. He calls for lights, and he goes away. And they all leave except Hamlet and Horatio. So Hamlet remarks, "Why, let the stricken deer go weep, the hart and goat play, for some must watch while some must sleep, so runs the world away." It seems to be a reference to a popular ballad at the time. He's in high spirits, he's quite thoughtful, he's got the deliberate answer that he wanted. Claudius is guilty. Now he's like the hunter, watching the deer scurry away. I mean, he can give himself a pat on the back. Look, I did it. I know Claudius did it. So Hamlet tells Horatio that I'll take the ghost's word for 1,000 pounds. Did thou perceive? Absolutely reliable, the ghost is. It's a hyperbolical sum of money. And Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come in, and the latter says that the king is, in his retirement, marvelous distempered. Hamlet asks if it is because of alcohol and with drink, but no, Guildenstern remarks that no, my lord, rather was choler. Choler as in anger, and this goes back to this ancient idea that you had humors, and if you had too much bile in your system, you would become choleric, or any disbalance of hormones would lead to a change in character and illness. And Hamlet says that it would be wiser for Guildenstern to say this to a doctor, not him, Hamlet, then maybe a doctor will purge him, because purging is, of course, a very unpleasant procedure. So Guildenstern at this point says, put your discourse into some frame and start not so wildly from thy affair. Put yourself into a coherent shape and listen to what I'm trying to say. Hamlet replies, I'm listening, and he says that the queen your mother in most great affliction of spirit has sent to me. Hamlet says that he's welcome then. He ignores the request to meet his mother. He's saying, oh, my mother sent you? Well, you're welcome here. So he's ignoring the fact that his mother wants to see him. Rosencrantz tries to convince him. She desires to speak with you in her closet ere you go to bed. And Hamlet in the end says that he will obey. Were she 10 times her mother? Have you any further trade with us? He's not even pretending they're friends anymore. Like, oh, so she sent you? Okay, you've done your business. I've agreed. Whatever. Just go. And he cites my wits deceased as an excuse when Guildenstern hints that he's being rude and he should see his mother. And Rosencrantz openly says, my lord, you once did love me. So at that point, Rosencrantz understands that Hamlet doesn't want anything to do with this, and Hamlet basically tells them like, yeah, well, you're being paid to be here, so no, I don't love you. Rosencrantz is saddened and asks, what is your cause of distemper? You do freely bar the door of your own liberty if you deny your griefs to your friend. So at this point, they both use you. It's more formal language rather than close and confident. He assures them like, yeah, sure, I still love you, but it rings a bit fake. He sends them off, and someone comes in with a recorder, and he asks Guildenstern if he'll play upon the pipe, and Guildenstern's like, no, I don't know how to. So Hamlet tells him that 'tis an easy as lying. You simply cover the holes and you breathe and you get the music. And Guildenstern says, but I don't have the skill. I can't even play a melody. And Hamlet says, why, look you now how unworthy a thing you make of me. You would play upon me, you would seem to know my stops, you would pluck out the heart of my mystery, you would sound me from my lowest note on the top of my compass, and there is much music, excellent voice in this little organ, yet cannot you make it speak. So in other words, well, you can't play this recorder, so why are you trying to play me? Why are you being so dishonest? Why are you being so superficial? They don't get a chance to reply because Polonius comes in and tells him that the queen wants Hamlet right now. Hamlet changes the topic. He quickly says, look at the clouds. This one looks like a weasel. This one looks like a whale. He tells him that he will come by and by to see his mother, and he gets all of them to leave. And now he says, soft now to my mother. O heart, lose not thy nature. Let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. Let me be cruel, not unnatural. It's night, he declares. I will speak daggers to her, but use none. So, in other words, he's reminding himself that it's witching time of night. It's a pathetic fallacy. Something bad is going to happen, but he's not going to kill her. He's going to use words to kill her. So, he's going to be patient and he's going to do what the ghost says, and he exits. Enter Claudius, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern. So, they know that Hamlet suspects them, but they don't tell this to Claudius. Claudius knows Hamlet suspects him, but he doesn't tell them. So, it's all a very big game. Claudius says, I like him not, nor stands it safe with us to let his madness range. None of them believe he's mad, but it's safer at this point to just send him to England, and, well, I'll send him with you so that the state may not endure hazard so dangerous as this hourly grow out of his lunacies. Guildenstern says that of course they'll do this to keep the country sane and happy, that live and feed upon your majesty, again a reference to the divine right to rule, so the head of the state has an effect on the whole country. The irony is, of course, he doesn't know the significance of what he just said, because the whole country is going corrupt because of Claudius, and certainly not because Hamlet is ruining Claudius's well-being. Polonius says Hamlet is going to his mother, and behind the arras I'll convey myself to hear the process. Claudius thanks him, and when he leaves, we finally get Claudius on his own with his monologue. He says, oh, my offense is rank, it smells to heaven, it has the primal eldest curse upon a brother's murder. Finally, we get a confession of his guilt. He's asking himself how he can pray to have the sin forgiven. What can he say? He asks if he should say, forgive me my foul murder, but dismisses it, since he still retains my crown, mine own ambitions, and my queen, his reasons for murder in the first place. So we see that actually he's not using the queen only for his own benefit, he genuinely wanted her too, but she's last on this list of priorities. Offence's gilded hand may shove by justice and off to scene the wicked prize itself buys out the law. In other words, well, the hand of the offender carrying a bribe may bypass the law, but I am the law. What's there to do? He's gotten away with it, so he thinks maybe only repentance is left, but he's happy to be guilty as long as he's still king. Bow stubborn knees and heart with strings of steel, be soft as sinews of the newborn babe, all may be well. He kneels, and at that point Hamlet enters. I mean, he's like, okay, I'm just gonna repent because I have to repent, not because I genuinely feel guilty. And Hamlet enters at this point. He decides, now might I do it, Pat, now he's praying. He draws his sword and says, and so I am revenged, that would be scanned. A villain kills my father, and for that I, his sole son, do the same villain sent to heaven. He then decides that if he kills Claudius right now, then he would die, and he has just apologized for his sins, so he'll go straight to heaven. Am I then revenged to take him in the purging of his soul when he's fit and seasoned for his passage? No. So of course the irony here is that Claudius is not actually praying, but Hamlet decides it shouldn't be like this. He should kill Claudius when he's drunk asleep or in his rage or in the incestuous pleasure of his bed. It's a delay perhaps because Hamlet is hesitant to do this, but either way this is tragic because he leaves and he misses the perfect opportunity to kill Claudius. And when he leaves, Claudius rises and saying, my words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go. So in other words, yeah, well, my words might fly up, but my thoughts are not at all repentance. So although I said prayer, I didn't mean it. He stands up and goes away. Play could have just ended right there. And at that point we have Act 3, Scene 4. Enter Gertrude and Polonius. Polonius tells Gertrude that she should instruct him to make no more performances and that his pranks have been too broad to bear with. She can't be graceful to him anymore if he continues to act this way. He tells her to be strict and he hides. And Gertrude is instructed upon in every way. She's continuously told what to do. She's happy to obey, to shift the responsibility onto others so that she doesn't have to think for herself and thus examine her guilt. Hamlet comes in. She tells him that, Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. And Hamlet replies, Mother, you have my father much offended. She asks him why he has an idle tongue, and he replies, well, you have a wicked tongue. She asks him why he's speaking with such disrespect, and he tells her to sit down. You shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you. You can't leave. I'm going to hold up a mirror and I'm going to show you the truth of your behavior. And the looking glass is also an acknowledgement of the state that they're in. Like, look at yourself. Truly, look at yourself. Don't look at other people. Stop with the whole spying that the state is doing. And for a first time ever, sit down and listen. And he's being quite violent towards her. She's terrified. She's frightened. What wilt thou do? Thou wilt not murder me. Gertrude is scared that he's going to kill her. She calls out, and Polonius behind the curtain hears this, and he calls out for help, and Hamlet says, how now? A rat, dead for a ducat, dead. Hamlet is so like fraught with emotion. He's eager to tell his mom what he thinks, finally, to hurt her with the daggers of his words. And here he sees someone crying out and he thinks it's Claudius and he stabs the curtain. And when Gertrude asks him what he has done, he replies, "I know not. Is it the king? So do I care what I have done? Not anymore. I'm desperate. I'm in a state. I don't care. Here is Claudius hiding, doing something sinful. I'm gonna kill him." And he doesn't even care if it was the king. I mean, he preferred that it was the king, but he's just there to kill. He's in a state, and instead he has killed Polonius, and Gertrude exclaims, "Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this?" And Hamlet replies, "Well, it's almost as bad as killing a king and marrying his brother. So who are you to tell me that I've done wrong? Because I am here to tell you that you have done wrong, lady." Like, he is being so rude to his mother. And Gertrude, of course, doesn't understand this kill a king part because she's innocent. And she asks him about it, and Hamlet says, "That's what I said. Exactly right. A murder." He describes Polonius as wretched, rash, intruding fool. Farewell. He has no regrets. I took thee for thy better. And he turns to Gertrude, who's wringing her hands and worrying, and he says, "Stop it. Sit down. Let me wring your heart. I'm gonna hurt your heart. I'm gonna pull the water out of your heart. You're gonna listen to me." He understands that she's not guilty of being complicit in her father's murder anymore, but that doesn't change the fact that she's still guilty for remarrying so soon after. He believes she has committed such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty. He tells her to look at the picture of the old king and the new king and to compare them. The old king had Hyperion's curls. He looked like Jove. He was powerful and commanding like Mars, the god of war. Every god was embedded in him. And now look at your husband, like a mildewed ear blessing his wholesome brother. He asks her if she doesn't have eyes. How could you possibly leave this far mountain and go and feed on a moor? He tells her that it isn't love, for at your age the heyday in the blood is tame. It's humble. In other words, you're not a young girl to feel sexually excited towards Claudius. Why would you do this? You're acting like a child. The sexual urge, the masculine honor, mutant in a matron's home, you're letting reason disappear, and you have no shame. And Gertrude says that he has turned her eyes into her soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tinct. In other words, he has made her so guilty. She has turned her eyes inwards and sees only black. She asks him to stop, but Hamlet continues. He tells her that she's lying in a bed stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty stuff. Gertrude begs him to stop, because the words are like daggers, but Hamlet just keeps on telling her that she married a robber who stole the crown, who stole the kingdom. And at this point the ghost shows up and Hamlet asks him to save me and hover over me with your wings. Gertrude remarks that he's mad. Hamlet knows that the ghost has shown up to chide him because Hamlet did not obey his instructions to be nice to his mother. He tells him, "Well, sorry that your son lapsed in time and passion. Just tell me what I should do." And the ghost tells him, "Do not forget this visit. Speak to your mother. Ask her if she's okay. Amazement on thy mother sits." Even in death, the ghost cares for his wife, and here she is, marrying so soon after his death. And Hamlet asks her, "Well, fine. How are you, Gertrude, really?" And Gertrude asks, "How am I? How are you, my son? Because you're acting insane." He's looking on vacancy, and with the incorporeal air do whole discourse. You're talking to air. You're acting insane. Your eyes are wild. She begs him to sprinkle cool patience. Calm down and tell me what you're looking at. Hamlet cries, "On him! On him! Look at his form on the stones. Don't look at me. Listen to what I'm saying. Listen to the ghost. Can't you see?" He's desperate for her to see, but she sees nothing. She hears nothing. The ghost begins to leave, and Gertrude tells him, "This is the very coinage of your brain. This bodiless creation ecstasy is very cunning in other words, this is your imagination. You're hallucinating." Hamlet replies, "My heart beats normally. I'm not mad." He urges her to listen, to stop corrupting her soul, to confess herself to heaven, to repent for everything, and do not spread the compost over the weeds to make them rancor. Stop sleeping in the lecherous bed. Stop making the disgusting bed more disgusting. He apologizes for the turns in expression, and Gertrude tells him, "Thou hast cleft my heart in twain. You've split my heart in two. You're breaking my heart. You're being so rude to me." And he tells her to throw away the bad part of your heart and live solely with the pure half. He tells her, "Good night, but don't go to your husband's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not. Refrain tonight, and that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence. Don't sleep with him today, and it'll be easier not to sleep with him tomorrow. Don't let him show any signs of affection towards you. I'm doing this for your own good. I must be cruel only to be kind. So don't let him kiss you. Don't let him pinch your cheek. Don't let him do sweet things to you. And I know I'm hurting you, but I'm being nice by doing it, because when you get rid of your bad heart, you'll live purely. You'll be able to go to heaven. You will truly fully repent. I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. So he admits to her that he's not mad, but he makes her promise that he won't tell anyone because he should be going to England. And Gertrude promises that if words be made of breath and breath of life, I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me. In other words, she died before she says anything. Hamlet tells her that she knows he must go to England. Gertrude remembers that it has been decided on. So he says that I'll lug the guts into the neighbor's room. He tells her good night, and he drags Polonius out of the room, and he says, is now most still, most secret, and most grave, who was in life a foolish, prating knave. So he drags Polonius to the next room and leaves him there unceremoniously. And that marks the end of Act 3. So I hope that you're as passionate and emotionate and wild about what happened, because it was a whirlwind of an event and things went just as quickly as I described them. I was trying to show you just how quickly things were going, because for an audience this would have been insane. Like, you're just sitting there, you're watching, everything is going fine, and then suddenly here he is accusing his mother, throwing out the wildest speeches, and stabbing Polonius. So it's quite a wild end to Act 3. And we'll see how Act 4 picks up next week. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon.